input, from those who should have, explained better how some of these provisions were contradictory to the Constitution, how they would also affect the revenues of the government. Because when NNPC was converted to a private limited liability, to a limited liability company, and became a business, even though it was
became independent of
exactly, and even though it was, it's owned by government, they stopped remitting money to the federation account. That started in Buhari's regime.
The moment the PIA...
And they started seeing the impact instantly, because if you have a source of if you have a tap source that provides most of the money, and then you now say the place is a company.
Close the tap.
The place is now a company. The company, it has now become a company. So, and companies render their accounts at the end of the year. So they would have turned around their revenues, do whatever they want to do with the money, and then it is when they declare profits at the end of the year that the government will now take their share, based on the shareholding structure and all that.
And if not, it's to declare.
Exactly.
Like the NNPC has been also trying to do, declare no profits.
Exactly. So the company can do business throughout the year with all the national resources. And then at the end of the day, they say they have used the money to pay salaries, travel abroad, or
pay subsidy.
Exactly. So I think this actually will have a very positive impact on national revenues.
Therefore, a faster means of solving that problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, like you rightly observed, an amendment will still have to be proposed to the PIA.
Yes.
An amendment will say
to bring it in line with this.
But while you are battling with that, if you like, take all the time in the National Assembly. If you like, don't do it. The executive order has already done it.
Exactly.
Isn't that a better approach?
I think it is.
For a nation that found itself where Nigeria found itself, revenues were dwindling. In fact, if not because the government also proactively stopped was that subsidy. If not because the government proactively stopped subsidy, most of the state governments would probably have gone under by now.
Exactly. And I think that's what governance is about, pragmatism. We are not slaves to the law. The law is made to serve the people and to regulate, the way governance is done. But if you have a president who knows his onions or who receives good advice and acts on them, and you see that there is a leakage, there is that the federation account was being starved of resources, then of course you have a duty to do something, and I think that's what this something is about. And yes, just like we said, correct it later, but at least let the revenue begin to flow again into the federation account, so that hopefully the borrowings will reduce, and all of that. So I think it's brickmanship. Actually, I think it's probably one of the more positive things that the government has done.
If you also look at the events of the past 3 years since President Tinubu came into office, we'll be facing that revenue shortage, left, right, and center. Revenue generation agencies were defaulting on what they were doing and all of that. We've been able to do this as regards the oil and gas sector now. How do you think we should also deal with the other revenue generation agencies that are not within the oil and gas sector?
Well, one of the...
As regards their operations and the federation account.
I think that the government doesn't set clear enough revenue targets, for the revenue generating agencies. I've always been a huge fan of, many, every government ministry should be a revenue generating agency, actually. Anyone that cannot generate revenue should be shut down or merged with others. You
doesn't have any means of any reason to exist.
There's no reason to exist if you are not generating revenue. Then other people are the ones paying you, paying your many staff. You get the point. So if we run government as a business, which I think the way to run any government, we'll discover that, whatever trillion, I think this year's budget is about 50 trillion or something. We should be budgeting in serious dollars. You get the point? Right. The total size of the Nigerian budget has not changed over the last 10 years. What has changed is the exchange rate, that is used to convert it to whatever the trillions are now. You get the point? And that's why the impact of governance on the average human being on the streets is hardly ever felt. So people see budgeting, as an annual ritual that really doesn't impact their lives. And it's because the government does not generate enough revenue. You can generate so much more revenue in this country without necessarily putting pressure on the people. You get the point? Because I don't think that, government becoming more business-like, more focused in revenue accretion to the federation account will necessarily lead to the citizens paying more. But here we are, there was so much apprehension around the review, of the tax laws. These 4 tax laws that were passed at the same time. And people were actually apprehensive of the fact that government was trying to claw back and make more money from the people. You get the point? And why people resist things like taxation is because they don't see the impact of revenue on their daily lives. Yeah. Because they see the government agencies and the government officials living large, while the citizens recede, in their standard of life. And I don't think it should be so. You get the point? So, to answer your question directly, I think that one of the best innovations, of the earlier government was the Treasury single account. You have to funnel. There are too many leakages in government revenue here. I don't know whether they are still implementing the Treasury single account with any seriousness. Because if you are not, then it means you are just making the chief executives of the government agencies that are generating revenue large and rich for nothing. They're just collecting revenue and spending it as they please.
I want to assume that with the frenzy that we are seeing and the expansion of the revenue net.
Yes.
I want to believe that the Treasury single account is still operational.
Well, it will be good to probe it.
I know that the only exception that I know was made to the Treasury single account was the FCT, which was excused from the Treasury single account, generate the revenue and spend it this way. And we could see the impact of that exemption anyway in the infrastructural turnaround that we have seen in the FCT.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea for government to identify all sources of revenue and ensure that everything is funneled in a structured way into the federation account. It's a good way, it's a good practice. But I also think that as you're looking at the revenue side, you should also be looking at the expenditure side. We also do not have enough discipline around the way government money is spent, in this country. So that, if the emphasis is on revenue generation, as it appears to be, the focus of this government, they should also look at that expenditure side to make sure that as the monies flow from the revenue, from the federation account, to the states and the local governments, the end use of it actually has a major, auditable impact on the lives of the citizenry. We haven't seen that connection.
We'll look at that much more closely. We'll get to that. Because here, I'd like us to take attention away from the federal government. It's a 3-tier government that we are running, for God's sake. It's a federation. Nobody, the largest chunk of the federation account goes to the other 2 tiers.
Yes, the states and the local governments,
And those are the 2 tiers of government that receive the less attention from us Nigerians. Those are the governments we don't care about. It's the federal government that gets the smallest amount that we put all of our attention. So we'll discuss that more. What can citizens do? As we know that these revenues are improving, what can citizens do and all of that? But let's say in the area of trying to expand the revenue generation, I'm sure when last did you pass through any of our airports? Okay, let me tell you something that is new. If you pass through the Abuja airport now, there's a system that is in place now. All transactions, payment of toll gates,
they're cashless.
Payment of car park tolls and all of that, they are cashless now.
They've been automated.
They have been automated. You get a card. Nobody receives any cash on behalf of government. No contractor puts himself between the people and the government. The revenue goes straight to the federation account. That's what is operational. I started, I think, last week when I passed through the airport, and then when I was coming back the first day, it has become fully operational. And you could see long traffic in Lagos and in Abuja and at the airports. The attempt is to ensure that all the monies that go into private pockets find its way to the federation account. That's part of the revenue generation drive that we're talking about.
Yes, I think it's a good practice, quite frankly. Like we're saying, there are too many leakages. You know, and it's just like you're running your own business, and then your staff are just doing all manner of things. You know, they collect monies, you know, for products that you sell, and then you don't get to see, you know, it in the bank account. You know, any business that runs that way actually goes under after a short while. You get the point. So, and in the digital age that we exist in right now, you know, there's hardly anything that cannot be automated. You know, and there's no, if you have a determined government that really wants to block leakages, they should be able to plug all those leakages and make sure that things are properly funneled. So, to that extent, of course, there is some inconvenience at the airports now. I read about people complaining about long queues and all that. But I think it's just an operational initial challenge.
But it has got to happen.
Exactly.
And you can't keep postponing.
It's something that is like postponing the evil day. So it's good that it's happening now. It's the way to go. You know, so that we can take full advantage of the digitalization of the world economy. You get the point. You know, gradually, for instance, you know, Nigerians are beginning to get very used to cashless transactions. You know, most things now, even the Bolly seller has the POS machine. You know, the POS system works fairly much better now than before. You know, there are many fintech organizations now rendering, you know, cash transfer services. The ability to bring the banks closer, you know, to bring banking closer to the people, you know, it's happening now more and more. If you ask, you know, 10 people, what's your bank account? They will usually say, well, you know, it's one of the fintech banks. You know, eight out of 10 people will say, you know, it's, I don't want to advertise anybody's business, but they'll mention.
We will allow you.
Exactly. They'll mention a payment
it's through this 111. Yes.
Exactly. So I think it's good. I think that remember the inconvenience we went through when Emefiele was CBN governor, when they mopped up all the cash, they said we're changing, you know, the currency and all of that, and it became a very serious problem. You know, for everything that has a disadvantage, there's also an advantage. You know, when we passed through that system in an election season, and many people couldn't even go to their communities to vote. You know what I mean? Because they couldn't pay transport, they didn't see cash, you know.
The timing that time, they have political order
timing was completely.
But it was a good policy.
But at the end of the day, we have matured. You know, more people are now using cashless. You know, sometimes I can go for weeks without any cash in my wallet. You know, it also, you know, reduces some of the outflows. Because you meet the security agent at the checkpoint, and then he's obviously expecting money from you. Say, well, you know now, you know, big men don't carry cash anymore. Everything is in, you know, and they cannot carry a POS machine and be collecting money from you. So I think that we are improving. I think that it should be sustained, you know, and that those who manage the back end should also activate a process that ensures that when they notice bottlenecks, like they are now in the airport, they should go into overdrive to ensure that, you know, the systems work more efficiently. And if that happens, then we have a better country.
I think it's just the process of people getting the card that is creating those traffic. Because once people get their card, there's no need for hold on.
Exactly.
It should be
seamless. So you actually got a card yourself, you know,
I tried to get it on my way out of Abuja. when I saw them, there was a massive mobilization at the airport, singing and drumming with big banners and all of that.
Yeah,
and then
they came promoting the process.
Promoting the process. And then they came to the departure hall to tell people what will happen. If you get this card, this is how you use it. You just get to the toll gate and you slot it. It deducts whatever you pay. It deducts it from your card. Once you notice that the amount in your card, which is like a wallet, the amount is you
top it up.
You reflate it again and all of that. You park in an authorized place. You want to pay fine.
Yes, you pay.
You pay it with your card and all of that.
Not a bad idea. I think it's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
I think
so the card is for everybody. Anybody that has anything to do with the airport, the card is for you. But I think the process was taking too long. I think.
And I also think that the publicity around it was not good enough.
They were doing the publicity at the airport.
Exactly. It shouldn't have been so.
And I actually advised them that, okay, if you want me to do these things, you first of all come and spend money on AIT. Bring this AIT, come and spend money on AIT.
Properly.
Then before I can put my own money in your system, come and put money in AIT. Let's promote it for you.
Exactly, because I didn't see much publicity online.
They were doing it.
I didn't see much publicity online. I didn't see television programs like this discuss it. So I think that whoever managed the back end, because if you are traveling,
they should have thought of spending money first, knowing full well at the end of maybe the first 1 month of operation of this, the revenue accruing from the Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria should have quadrupled.
Exactly. Because
so you know that money will be coming in, but spend money first.
You can imagine. All the people who have been feeding fat, with the earlier system.
Too bad for them.
Yeah, sure.
Nigeria must survive. All right. Exactly. So just quickly on this point, which is that there's no ministry or parastatal or agents of government that is not capable of generating something. No matter, after all, we didn't know JAM was generating money.
Could generate money the way they are now.
The federal government was used to getting like 20 million, 30 million from
exactly, and then suddenly they changed the head.
Professor Ishaq got to that place and then posted a revenue of 6 billion naira.
And the people say, what? You mean this kind of money can come here? Come from
6 billion. So there's no agency that is not...
And I also think that, going forward, when they are, calibrating ministries and government agencies, one of the things that must be at the back of the mind of those being put in place or government agencies being created should be, how do they generate revenue? And how does that revenue eventually find its way into, the coffers of government so that governance can be done better? You get the point?
Right.
Any minister who does not know how to generate revenue should actually be fired. You get the point? And once we do that, and also at the state level, the same thing, the commissioners. The governors should let the commissioners have the matching orders and say, I need to see the revenue you are generating. Otherwise, I don't create the ministry, I just shut them down or merge them with other people.
All right. Okay, we need to go on a quick break. When we come back, I'd like us to also attend to some of the fears being expressed about this executive order now. Good enough, the federal government set up an implementation committee. The implementation committee has been meeting, set up technical committees and all of that. And we understand now that there's going to be a period of moratorium. This is one area where people had expressed fears that if you just apply this shock, it may lead to investor fright or something like that. We'll look at that and what how the federal government is addressing it. That'll be after we come back from this break.
Anything from our real-time updates and exclusive content. Follow and participate in discussions on live TV studio programs to shape the narratives. Subscribe, engage, and share from AIT.live at AIT_online on X, AIT Online on Facebook, official AIT Live on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads, AIT_live, and AIT Livestream 1 on YouTube. YouTube. Stay connected with AIT. On air, online, on live.
All right, the program is Jigsaw, and of course, our guest is Chief Madaki. Chief Fabe is an oil and gas expert, and he's also a lawyer of more than 3 decades post-October.
I get decades. 4 decades. I can't believe. For 7 years.
Wow.
You know, I can't even believe it.
Qualified to be in the judiciary, even at the very apex of
Supreme Court is 15 years was called.
15 years.
Exactly.
Anyway, thank you so much for being our guest. Right, we're looking at how the fears being expressed that, okay, this is a technical area, a lot of joint venture calls, agreements signed, and all of that. And all of a sudden, we are introducing a system that will change the way.
Plug.
Exactly. First of all bodies now have to be paid to the federation account. All profits generated from all those joint venture calls, whether it's in the oil sector or gas sector, has to go to the federation account. There were deductions that were being made, which were being paid to the NNPC.
Yes, 30%.
30% Frontiers Fund. No to that.
Yes.
Pay all money to the federation account. If any money is to be paid for Frontiers Fund, it will be
budgeted for.
It will be budgeted for.
Exactly.
It will be budgeted for. Then retaining 30% of your profit. No to all of that. Pay everything to the federation account. Make a claim. This could have come as root shock, but we are told now that there will be a period of time before all of this will come into effect. As somebody who is practicing in that area, what would you advise? What should that timeline be for everybody to adjust to the new reality?
Yeah, I think it should be relatively short. The idea is that this
1 month, 2 months?
Maybe 1 month. It should be more than 1 month. You know, it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
You know, and don't forget that before the PIA,
yes,
that was how you know, the revenues were going into the federation account. You know, so if the PIA introduced a change, which has created a huge inconvenience, and also created a lot of further opaqueness, you know, in the management of government revenues, you know, from oil and gas. I think that, you know, the shorter the implementation time, the better. You get the point? Because it's just to, you know, stop what you're doing already. You get the point? I don't see why NNPC would be taking 30% as management fee, you know, for, you know...
NNPC that cannot guarantee us local refinery.
Do you know exactly? Do you know what 30% of the revenue is flowing from oil and gas daily sales come to? And then you're just taking this, you know, and then, you know, turning it around. That means...
And then in addition to that, they will also submit a huge
exactly
for what's that thing that Tinubu stopped?
Subsidy.
Subsidy.
Exactly. You know, so it was a jamboree.
Yes.
You know, I don't know how this country survived, but I think the survivor, you know, is because actually the citizens of Nigeria don't expect much from governance. You know,
people were surviving.
Exactly. Everybody survived.
Exactly.
Everybody, you know, right from time, everybody has been their own government. Yeah. You know, you do the road to your house. You know, by adding community money. You know, people contribute money.
Same for together, and also establish vigilantes.
Exactly. So, you know, to maintain security and all of that. So, because Nigerians are used to, you know, surviving on their own. That's why I think a good government will be easy. You know, it will be easy to govern well if you have a positive government that actually wants to get something done for the people. Because at the end of the day, Because the people don't really expect much from government. You know, when the governor feels a pothole on the road, everybody's praising the governor.
They spend twice the money they spend to fill that pothole. They spend double the amount to then come and commission.
Exactly, and then they say they have filled this pothole that have been here for long ago.
Dividend
they are really praising the government, you know, for even it's like without knowing that it is actually the duty of government to get these things done. You know, fix it well, make sure that the country runs well. But our people over the years have not made enough demand on government. So I think the second leg of this whole thing is, yes, with all the revenues accruing to government, what does government do with this money? How does this money trickle down? You know, how do we ensure that, you know, there is no profligacy in monies, you know, that government officials spend on themselves. You know, as it is right now, you know, there's so much opaqueness around the, you know, the earnings of National Assembly members or ministers, you know, or government officials, you know, and all of so all of this budget that you hear in trillions still end up being spent, you know, by the same few government officials on their own. You know, if senators earn as much as 30 million naira a month, as we are told, you know, it's a conspiracy of silence. Nobody actually tells us how much they earn. You know, if you talk to them, they just be looking at you. They
have a ready-made pay slip.
Exactly.
That all of them will brandish.
So meanwhile, where the real money is entering is somewhere else. And that's why, you know, there's an organization I run called the Public Interest Advocacy Network. You know, we went to court recently. And the matter is before the National Industrial Court. It was actually supposed to have been heard yesterday. We sued the government, you know, and we said we need to have a national minimum wage and a national maximum wage. So, such that if the national minimum wage is set at the UN threshold for poverty, which is $3 a day. The UN in June 2025 said that no human being who is breathing in and out should actually live on less than $3 a day. So $3 a day multiplied by 30 days comes to about 150,000 naira. You get the point. So if
you can't have a 75,000 naira minimum wage.
Put 70,000 naira as minimum wage, which is less than half of that global threshold that the UN has set. Nigeria is a member of the international community.
That should be setting good.
Exactly. So if you say the least paid Nigerian staff in the public service should earn 70,000. You are saying that they should, that the average Nigerian employee, in fact, not the average, the least paid Nigerian employee actually lives on about $1 a day or $1.20 or $1.30 a day, you know, at 70,000 a month. That's already a breach of international law, you know, and I think that, so we have...
And then the gap between that and the salary, the highest pay.
Exactly. So what we now said in that case, and I think that, you know, it makes a very interesting litigation. We have said 150,000 naira should be set as the minimum wage, you know, so that we can bring ourselves in tandem, you know, with the global standard, you know, set by the UN in June 2025. And then we say we should also have a national maximum wage. And if the president is the top public servant in the country, the president should be earning the national maximum wage. And we have suggested to the court that national maximum wage should be 3 million naira. You get the point?
That's the salary of the president.
And that should be the salary of the president. It should be an all-in salary. So that, you know, the American...
Don't they use allowances to just inflate it again.
So it should be that national maximum wage. You know, and then the president should buy his own food like the American president does. You know, the budget for the president's food in 2025, in the 2025 budget was 9 billion naira. That's 25 million naira a day. If you divide that amount by 365 days, that's 25 million naira a day. We know the size of the president's family. You get the point. How can the president eat 25 million naira a day? Is he feeding the whole town? You get the point. So, and then you now say that his salary is X amount. In America, you know, the American president's salary is $460,000 a year. And from this money, he pays his children's school fees. He manages his house. If they bring food for him and his wife, they give a bill and the president pays for it. You get the point? Just like you pay in a restaurant. It's only maybe when an international visitor comes to join them or is organizing something, you know, that then, you know, the state takes. Why can't we run like that? You know, why can't we manage our resources in such a way that those who are in public, so that the lure of public office will go down drastically? You know, so we say that once we set the national, and the National Industrial Code can actually do that. Once we set the national minimum wage and national maximum wage, anybody who pays himself any money outside of this, you know, of this amount, you know, anybody who earns more than the national maximum, which is the president's salary, you know, commits an economic crime for which he goes to prison.
I think, you know what? I think there's need for, you know, conversation around.
Yeah, exactly. We need to have a conversation around.
Yeah, maybe you can make available that copies of that.
Exactly. I will send you the court proceedings.
Yeah, so that we can form conversation.
Exactly. It's a very interesting conversation. Yeah. Honestly. Yeah. Because the reason there is cutthroat competition for public office in Nigeria is because it's a sort of making money. Yeah. You see poor people who then go into any of the government offices, and even as a councillor, before you know it, the man is a big man. Yeah. You know, it shouldn't be like that.
I agree with you.
Yeah, there's too much.
Now this executive order, we'll go back to it. It's all about, you know, bringing sanity into the revenue generation and how it is also spent.
Yes.
When this money gets to the federation account, it's not only Tinubu that will be spending it. It's money belonging to the federation.
Yes.
And it has to be shared according to how the Constitution has stipulated it.
Yes.
States, local governments will get, then there are some statutory deductions and all of that, and all of that. That is where the attention is, because no doubt the revenue profile of the governments will improve. Now, that certainly it will improve. What should be your, I mean, what are your concerns post that?
Yeah, the leakages again. You get the point. Yes, you have more revenue, but contractors are complaining.
So that we don't go back to the era of go on.
Exactly.
When the slogan was, we have money, our problem is not money.
Exactly, but
what to do with it.
Yes. Now, with the increase in government revenue should translate to better life for the citizens. You know, that still remains my, where I think that the focus should be. You know, for too long, the average Nigerian has survived on his own, you know, as if there is no government, you know. I don't think government, I benefited anything from government the whole of last year, you know, or the year before. You get the point? So if you are unable to generate your own money and to keep your family going, you are in deep trouble. You get the point? But in other countries, there are social welfare schemes. You know, if you are sick, you are not holding, you know, carrying your hand on your head or starting a revenue mobilization process from your friends, you know, to say, come and help, you know, pay, you know, medical bills and all of that. We need to start making government accountable at every level. You know, the level of discretion available to public officers, you know, to fritter resources away at will is now totally unacceptable. You know, should now become totally unacceptable, so that we can make more demands on government. We can put them on the spot to actually deliver. Here now, as it is, you know, the entire government agenda is set by the government officials themselves. There is no accountability. There are no tasks and targets. You know, there is no review, you know, against plan. You know, people are just running from day to day, and I don't think governors should be handled that way.
So what is expected of the citizens in this regard?
I think we should have a more...
Shouldn't we have CSOs,
exactly,
civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, shifting their attention away from election,
exactly,
to how resources are accruing to government, which ought to translate to improvement in our lives, how such resources are managed. And it should start from where the people live, the local governments and the states. Nobody knows how the local governments are run.
Exactly.
We're also seeing a president now who's championing that cause. Governors should free up the local governments and allow them to breathe.
Exactly.
When we allow them to breathe, how then do we hold the local governments, because they are the closest to the people? How do we hold them accountable? Shouldn't we have all these civil society organizations who demonstrate in Abuja every time about e-transmission or no e-transmission? Focus on things that affect the people. How revenues that accrue to the governments are spent.
I think there should be more activity in the civic space. You know, the average Nigerian is too detached from governance, and it's not good. So just like you mentioned, it's extremely important for us to encourage, you know, to engineer the formation of many civil society organizations that actually are effective. You get the point? You know, when I set up the Public Interest Advocacy Network in 2024, you know, it was driven by, you know, my aversion to the way law was being practiced. You get the point?
Yeah.
You know, conventional law practice has become boring to me. You know what I mean? People have a dispute, they hire you to represent
Public Interest Advocacy
Network, PIAN. You know, I put that organization in place because I said, the only way I'm going to continue to enjoy being a lawyer is not to practice law the way every other person is practicing it. You get the point? I need to be able to ensure that my knowledge of the law translates to the public good. So how do I do that without complaining on WhatsApp platforms? You know, how do I ensure, you know, that the courts...
become a Twitter...
Exactly.
Twitter...
Let me sending tweets up and down. I don't know. You know, you can be grilling some issues on some very active... We have almost 1,000 people on the Public Interest Advocacy Network platform.
Okay.
You know, so every day, night and day, people are chatting. Well, how do these chats translate to good governance? How do, you know, what's the mechanism for funneling ideas into policy? So I now said, no, the courts, vilified as they are, still remain the bastion of hope for the common man. Okay. Let's go to those courts. Let's get them to do things. So we filed some cases. We have 3 cases running right now. One is to stop the political parties from extorting money from aspirants at election time. The Constitution guarantees the right to vote and be voted for. Yeah. But that right to be voted for is being taken away by the political parties. Yeah. You know, now they're waiting for another jamboree to start.
50 million,
you know, 50 million, 100 million, you know, and, you know, this ties into poor governance, because what it means is that only the money bags have a right to aspire to office, even though the Constitution says you have a right to be voted for. So the man who earned that 70,000 humble minimum wage should be able to aspire to be president of his country. If he can't get a
at best, local government.
No, let him people aspire to anywhere. But the point of it is that if he cannot get his party ticket because he doesn't have enough clout to be given a ticket to run for president, that is his own problem. You know what I mean? But to say that he must bring 100 million like APC obscenely did, you know, in the last election, and 28 people paid. What that means is that these 28 Nigerians bringing 100 million out to say some of them can't even win councillorship elections. But we had 28 people who actually paid that money. What should have happened was for the Federal Inland Revenue Service to write all of them nice letters to say, how much did you declare as your income last year? How much tax did you pay? So that there will be inconvenience, you know, tied to this kind of brigandage, which is actually what it is. And you know, now we're getting to the election season. INEC have published the timetable. Very soon, the parties will come with their long knives to say, hey, before you can open your mouth to say, I want to be local government chairman or governor, you know, as some of us are running. You know, in my state, I'm running, you know, by the way. And then, yeah, for governor in Benue, yes, I'm in pole position to win, but that's a story for another day. Now,
pole position?
Yeah, I'm actually in pole position to win. You know, and,
there's an incumbent governor who's entitled to his second term.
He's not entitled. That's
sorry.
Who probably deserves a second term, but he asked me to contend with. But that's a story for another day.
Is it party?
No, PDP. I'm running as under the platform of the PDP.
PDP?
Yes.
Okay.
And you know,
good luck to you.
We are repairing the party from within.
That's why I said good luck to you.
In no time you see that, you know, PDP is actually the only grassroots party in this country. But that's again another story for another day. You know, so there are so many things to talk about in this your program, which is actually very interesting, by the way. You know, so when we're headed, where where I'm headed with this is that, if we have a more
how to empower the citizens to ask questions
civic space
of their leaders.
So we're asking the court to say, give us back our right to be voted for. So it should not just be a right to go and vote. Many people are no longer voting. In the last election for Abuja area councils, only 7% of the people came out to vote. 7. We have 1.6 million registered voters in Abuja. But the people who
there were polling units where at least between 500 and 1,000 people or voters were expected.
Yes, but
only 7.
Exactly. People are no longer interested because they don't see the connection between governance, and that effort. So why would I come out from my house and go and queue up and then cast some vote that is not going to make an impact? You get the point. That's actually a minority government, because if only 7% of people determine who governs, then we have a problem. Another mobilization that we should also do, it also leads to some level of radicalism. In Brazil, it is mandatory to vote. You cannot sit in your house on election day, you must vote. They are not going to tell you to vote in a particular way, but as an adult who has a card, a voter's card, you must vote one way or the other. That way, you are also increasing the civic responsibility. Nigerians will then be involved in the governance of their country. You get the point. You can't tell me that, X number of parties are contesting, have candidates in an election, and you don't support anybody. It's not possible.
All right. Like you said, there's so much to talk about. And on the issue of people bringing out 100 million to 5, we can also see changes, because the National Revenue Service also being calibrated in a way to ask those critical questions.
Exactly.
If you bring out 100 million to buy expression of interest,
how much was the tax last year?
You expect the NRS to come calling to ask you critical questions. All right. Thank you so much. We could have loved to go on and on and on, but we'll leave it here. There are so many issues that you have actually prepped for us, which we also find time to pick up as issues of national discourse. Thank you so much, Mr.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, that's Jigsaw for today, and of course, our focus had been on the Executive Order 9 on oil and gas revenue redirection, which the president signed last week, and it's already taking effect. Thank you for investing your time with us. I'll see you around. My name is Gbenga Aruleba.